Let's get started now. We've got more people coming in. So thank you all. Thank you all attendees for joining our webinar today called The Great Resignation. My name is Carlos Green and I'm honored to serve as the Senior Program Director for NACo. And we understand that this is a very hot topic in our country today, as well as with our counties. And NACo is honored to be able to bring this webinar to you all today through our initiative called the Workforce Network. And our Workforce Network goal is to provide an exchange of resources, a platform to share best practices, and opportunities for continuous learning through engagement, talent management, and workforce trends. Now, a few housekeeping items before we actually get started. Now, this webinar is scheduled from 1 o'clock to 2:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is being recorded, so it will be available to you and your staff after the webinar has been concluded. If you have any questions, please place those in the chat feature and we will get to those and look to respond to those toward the latter part of our webinar. Alana Hurley, who is part of our team, she is making sure that we don't have any technical issues. So if you do have some, just put those in the chat and she'll be able to respond to those. And then lastly, we are actually looking to have an in-person workshop during our annual conference meeting in July in Adams County, Colorado. So take a look at that or be on the lookout for that. So we're very excited that we're going to continue to have these kind of webinars and workshops. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for our webinar today, Dr. Debbie Stoudemire, who serves as our NACo's Chief Administration Officer. And she will provide some context for the webinar, facilitate the conversation, and introduce our distinguished guest panelists. So let's welcome Debbie Stoudemire.
Thanks, Carlos. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, welcome to the NACo Workforce Network. As Carlos mentioned, I am Debbie Stoudemire, NACo's Chief Administrative Officer. And we are excited that so many of you have decided to join us as we discuss what is now known as the Great Resignation. So I just want to share a few statistics with you. Recently, I read the results of a survey that showed that more than half of all workers in the state and local government sector are actually considering leaving their jobs voluntarily, whether to change jobs, retire, or leave the workforce entirely. And the question obviously is why and what can we do about it? Also, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, an average of 3.9 million people per month quit their jobs in 2021. And for the government, 38% say workers are accelerating retirement plans. So what does that mean? It means that it's now an employee's market. And retirement plans, as you know, are no longer the tool for recruitment or retention. As a result, employers are reevaluating their overall benefit package and the other retention tools, such as reviewing wages, re-examining recruitment processes, enhancing onboarding procedures, adjusting job descriptions. They're even putting more focus on professional development. And we at NACo, we're looking at things like pain points, what's causing frustration and anxiety among staff. And we're trying to improve processes. We're also regularly conducting what we call stay interviews. And that's where we meet with employees to find out what makes them stay at NACo and what can we do to help retain them. As I always say, it's better to conduct a stay interview rather than an exit interview, which of course, at that point is just too late. The bottom line is we need to do anything and everything that impacts human capital. At NACo, we're sharpening our focus on just realizing it's important to find people who not only have the skills but who are aligned with our unique culture. We recognize that when you hire talent that doesn't fit, you risk having employees who don't fully engage in their work, simply because they oppose the corporate philosophy or they just don't agree with how we operate. And as a result, employee morale, performance, and retention tends to suffer. You've probably noticed that during this Great Resignation, candidates are emboldened by the pandemic and this talent shortage. And they're coming in right off the bat asking for everything. They're asking for the moon. So how do we get a handle on this? Or how do we stop the bleeding? So I briefly shared with you some of the things that NACo is doing, but we want to hear from others. So let me introduce a few people we've invited to help us sort through this. I'm going to introduce three of the invited guests. I'll start with Ian Cohen. Ian is the county administrator in Livingston County, New York. He has an MPA in local government management and is what I call inches away from receiving his doctorate of publication in public administration. In addition to his work as county administrator, Ian consults regularly with municipalities and counties on executive search and talent acquisition through his firm, Academic Partners.
Oh my gosh.
He teaches leadership, ethics, management, and finance courses for a multitude of MPA programs nationwide. Currently, Ian serves on the boards of the National Association of County Administrators, the New York State Cities County Management Association, and the Finger Lakes Area Counseling and Recovery Agency. We also have the renowned Tim Rishalti, Dr. Rishalti. He is the Chief Executive Officer at the Professional Development Academy and Chief Architect of the NACo High Performance Leadership Program. Dr. Rishalti has over 20 years of professional management experience and started his career in corporate finance for a multi-billion-dollar company. Most recently, before his CEO role at the Academy, he served as a principal executive for 14 years in state, local, and state government, serving as Chief Learning Officer in Oregon County until 2014. Tim is the co-author of several publications, including Projects Without Boundaries, Successfully Leading Teams and Managing Projects in a Virtual World, Program Management for Improved Business Results, Leading Global Project Teams, Distributed Team Collaboration in Organizations, and My Best Advice, Proven Rules for Effective Leadership. And finally, but not least, we have Holly Tate. Holly Tate is the Senior Vice President of Growth at Leader, which is a people development software company. Prior to working at Leader, she spent 9 years helping organizations help and build the best teams at an executive search firm. In 2020, Holly left her role as Vice President of Business Development and Marketing to launch the Ready Network, LLC, which she founded to help people and organizations get ready for growth. Holly is also a contributor for the Forbes Communications Council and co-founder of Statesman Beverage Company. Now, before we get started, I just want to say we like this webinar to be interactive as much as possible. And if you want, you can ask questions in the chat as we go along, but because we have such a full agenda here, I want to be certain that we hear from all of the presenters. So I'm going to ask that we save the bulk of the questions for later. And as a reminder, I think Carlos already mentioned this, we are recording this webinar, and afterwards, we'll be able to send a link for you to review at your convenience. So we have a full agenda. We have an interesting topic. We have great presenters. So why don't we get started? And Ian, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Carlos and NACo for putting this together and asking me to participate. Happy to sort of share some insights maybe from the active county staff perspective or position. So Debbie definitely articulated what we are experiencing in the Great Resignation. We call it different things, and I'm going to mention a few things as far as different names when I end here, but essentially what you had was people left employment, left the workforce, may come back, have started to come back a little bit, not necessarily specific to an industry or type. So you had people leaving in retail hospitality, you had people leaving in public service and criminal justice. Counties as employers, so as organizations, were certainly impacted by this. In my county, we're the largest employer. We employ 1,200 people in a county of 60,000 people, with 32 departments spread across scores of programs and services. Your county is probably likewise situated where you're a major employer in your particular geographic region in your county. So The Rockefeller Institute did which is a New York State-based think tank that does national and state surveys and studies, did a study that said pre-pandemic staffing levels were 1 million jobs more than they are at present. So that state and local, they did combine it state and local. So there's some infiltration of state figures in that number, but 1 million workers less than we were at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Another point I wanted to make is this definitely cuts across rural counties and urban counties. So NACo is representative of both, and of course those in between. I'm kind of on the more rural, small county side, but I have lots of counterparts and friends on the large urban county caucus. It really cuts across counties, cuts across demographics, socioeconomic factors of the counties. Everybody's really experiencing this. Segueing into what I consider some of the specific impacts and maybe why we're seeing this, we have a lot of frontline and essential staff workforce members in our county workforce. So we are A to Z, what I call true life cycle, cradle to grave service providers in the sphere of public service. So county governments, you can't really find anywhere in the local government world or the public sector world where you have the diversity, scope, and breadth of service provision that you have in county government. So you have early intervention, pre-K special ed, all the way to hospice and Office for the Aging programs and nursing homes. So you have those kind of industries, if you will, sub-industries, those specialties where maybe they're more inclined to be, frustrated, stressed out, burnout, fatigue, and what have you. And I'll touch on that in a second. Also, we had some budget strife. I mean, many of us have the great benefit right now of sitting on some major stimulus dollars. So the American Rescue Plan and the infusion of money that came our way. But before that, we were, going through a couple of budget cycles of tourism taxes being down, sales tax being down. If you have an income tax, potentially that being down. And some of the answers were early retirements, cost-cutting endeavors, furlough programs where you were laying people off for periods of time or perhaps permanently. So that affects, obviously, your employment rank. So that kind of is a factor in this whole Great Resignation discussion. And also you have the work from home, remote workforce, what I call the rigidness of the bureaucracy sometimes in county government that maybe didn't lend itself well to an attraction standpoint that I know Tim and Holly and others are going to be talking about. So shifting into why we might be seeing some of this and experience some of this trend specific to county government, I'll start with the first thing I mentioned, which is stress and burnout and fatigue. We have also health risks associated with our frontline workforce. So emergency medical staffers, sheriff's office members, nurses, healthcare. We run a nursing home, for example, in Livingston County. Those people were having maybe a heightened level of risk, and maybe they felt that it was best that they leave their positions. We also have just the general stress and burnout of that work that people have been doing for now 2+ years in this pandemic-related environment. We also have the vaccine mandate, and we have a mandate that many of us in the county world who have healthcare setting departments have had to comply with. I know in my personal experience here in Livingston County, we had 50 folks that we had to unfortunately terminate the employment of out of a workforce of about 375 that did not get vaccinated. So that was also a factor cited in the Rockefeller Institute study. It was a small factor, but a factor nonetheless of how there are staff departures happening at the county government level. One of the reasons why was that. I think we also see some changing norms and needs and wants and how county government is either responsive or non-responsive to some of those norms and the evolution of the workforce and their wants and needs. Debbie kind of joked around about that in the beginning by saying that, maybe incoming candidates are sort of have a heightened level of expectation of what their benefit offerings will be or what they will be afforded in their position, because as the joke says, today is a very good time to be a free agent. So really it's your organization and your culture. Are you evolving? I use kind of the Google example. So you have the rigidness and bureaucracy and red tape and sort of sometimes the static nature of the stereotypical county government setting kind of on one end of the spectrum. And then you have the ping pong tables, feet up on couches, really cool, work life situation seemingly of, maybe the Googles or, some of the tech companies. And I'm not sure I really want to get over on the right side with my county workforce, but I'm not sure I want to be stuck on this left side. So I kind of want to inch forward, incrementally beyond that to sort of stave off what amounts to a great resignation of our own workforce situations of our own county governments. And it's also compensation and benefits. Debbie talked a little bit about that. So it's not just the dollars. I've done some research on this just for county managers and administrators, and compensation itself is a straight salary. Your net pay is low on the rankings of wants and needs in terms of people wanting to remain in their present position. It's like a distant fourth or fifth. It's organization, it's management, it's the political decorum within the organization, but it's also wellness and what your work from home options look like. What are your ancillary benefits, the work-life balance, childcare availability, other insurance offerings. So that's something that we need to think about as employers. I know my other two fellow speaker and presenters are going to talk about that. So to finish up, I kind of liken the Great Resignation also to a great reevaluation and a reassessment. So I think people across the board nationally, from any sector, nonprofit, private sector business, retail, hospitality, child education settings, county government settings, they're evaluating what's important, right? So there was a reset, there was a mind shift in terms of what's important with all the calamity that we saw economically and health-wise, life and death-wise with COVID. So then you have to ask yourself as a county organization, are you an employer of choice? If I have options in front of me, why should I choose you? I have the public service motivation perhaps, but why you over the state government option or the city county government option that's in front of me? Or if I'm a healthcare worker, why you and why not the hospital down the street? So what's your total compensation? I think you need to ask yourself that. It's not just the straight dollars and the net pay. What do your other benefits look like? What do your other offerings look like? What's your value proposition and your separator? Again, what does your culture look like? Is there some rah-rah pizzazz to being an employee of your specific county? Why or why not? And then again, the last question is, why do people want to work for your county? So the Great Resignation means people left. Many of them will come back to work. And of course, you're going to have regular openings in the course of your business where you need to recruit for and find people for. So I'm going to segue into Tim now, Carlos, for the next piece of the presentation, but really to talk about the retention efforts and becoming an employer of choice and sort of how to attract talent in this next generation of what happens after the Great Resignation.
Hey, Ian, if I can ask, we talk about why people are leaving, particularly the local and state government. One of the things you talked about a little bit was compensation. Are you finding that the wages in the private sector has anything to do with the reason people are leaving the government?
I think that in part it is wages, but I also think, and you touched a little bit on it too, but to expand on it, it is also probably 30, 40 years ago, the dynamic was I'll take a little bit of a less rate of pay or maybe an average rate of pay to the market for the benefit of a really good pension system and a really good healthcare package, at least in the public sector county government world. Decades past, now today, pension systems at the state level have changed. We've got different tiers and sort of they're less benefit rich. You also have different healthcare situations where you have employer cost shares and that are higher than they used to be, and you have retiree healthcare that is not part of the equation that used to be part of the equation in many examples. So I think that total benefit package potentially has changed in certain states and certain counties. So I think that rate of pay maybe gets more laser focused on because those other things aren't of a great benefit that they used to be. Yeah,
you're right. The pension plans are no longer the defined benefit plan. They're now the defined contribution plan. And so I think people no longer used to say, I'll just work for the government a few years and I'll get, a certain percentage of my salary. So with that, Tim, how about we hear from you?
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I appreciate it. And Ian, thank you. You did a great job kind of laying the context of the situation we find ourselves in. And it is really, really complex. And Ian, kind of mentioned, some of the attributes of organizations like Google that can be great attractors of talent and talent possibly leaving our counties. And speaking of which, by the way, if you're just recently dialed in, a lot of folks explain where they're calling in from. I want to say hello to all my neighbors here in Oregon. I'm dialing in from Deschutes County in Oregon, and it's great to be with you all. And Debbie, thank you and the rest of the NACo team for pulling together a great topic and a great conversation that's going to take place now. And as you mentioned, will continue throughout the year, especially in Adams County at the NACo annual conference, which hopefully everyone will be able to attend and participate in this ongoing conversation because it is a complex one. I'll bring up another organization that folks are very familiar with, and that is Apple. Steve Jobs is one individual that we're all familiar with. And I'm going to bring up a quote that Steve Jobs had, and he made several times while he was building Apple. And it resonates not just for big tech companies like Apple, but we will understand the meaning of this as well. And you've probably heard this quote before. Steve Jobs says, "The only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work." And we see this great resignation and the great attraction because individuals are looking to achieve higher levels of satisfaction. They're looking for something in this great resignation that they can't currently find. And some of it is a belief perspective. Ian just mentioned that some of the individuals that are leaving county government from his perspective, from his county and others as well, are because of certain mandates that are being put in place, vaccination mandates as an example, and individuals are making a choice. They're choosing to make a change that, I'm going to leave this situation and find another situation. It might be pay as well, as Debbie and Ian were just talking about. There's a number of reasons that this takes place. And really what we're talking about is change. And Alana put a chat in the chat box for those that have been through CLI, at NACo, as well as the NACo High Performance Leadership Program, you'll be familiar with the fact that any type of change starts with a dissatisfaction. There's a dissatisfaction in the current state and a desire to find something that is of greater satisfaction. And so what I want to talk a little bit about and what I'll share to this contribution of conversation around the Great Resignation is the flip side of the Great Resignation is the Great Attraction. What are the attractors? And sometimes to talk about the attractors is to talk about what is happening, what are some of the dissatisfied aspects of what we find ourselves involved in work. To kind of put this in perspective, the next slide illustrates a few things that are leading to decisions to move and then leading also for decisions to stay. And so we know that there are multiple forces that are currently taking place today that are creating this great resignation, as well as, again, the flip side is the great attraction. We make decisions to resign. We make decisions to move forward and accept a new role, a new job, a new organization to participate in based on not only our decisions, but our attitudes relative to that organization, the culture, the expectations that we have. And the three forces that have really come together to create a magnifying effect around this great resignation is certainly the pandemic. The pandemic has created new opportunities that it has not created before, and it's actually created more division than what we've experienced in recent years past as well. So the pandemic has been a great influencer in terms of what's happening. A great enabler for what's happening as well is technology. Technology think about how many Zoom calls we've been on in the last 2 years, and then think how many Zoom calls we were on 2 years prior to that. The numbers are staggering in terms of their difference. Technology in the form of what we're doing right now in this webinar, where we have 100 individuals coming together around a very important topic to collaborate and communicate and share best practices, as well as some concerns, as well as some challenges that we all face. Technology is a great enabler for things that can happen. And we've learned that as we've continued the business of our counties through the challenge of the pandemic to provide services to those that are in the most need within our communities. And then demographics. Ian mentioned as well that, there's just certain expectations that people have, and our demographics are changing. As we see the silver tsunami, if you will, sometimes it's referred to that, of those executives within counties and local government that are retiring. There's a significant gap between the next level up and the leaders that are going to be taking their positions, and then the gap between those folks and the next level down, and so on and so forth. So we need to find out, how do we actually bring greater level of attraction to what we're doing? Well, in order to do that, we can go back through history. We can go and kind of think about some of the great theoretical models, if you will, because the models are great in terms of practice. We're all familiar with the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and Abraham Maslow, in all the work that he did, he understood that first and foremost, there are these physiological needs, right? We need to have clean air to breathe, and we need to have clean water to nourish ourselves, as well as good food to nourish ourselves. We need to have shelter. But once we have that, we're really looking for safety and then belonging. And we need to have some level of esteem that's provided to us and that we can provide to others as well, before we achieve what he ultimately was talking about regarding this idea of self-actualization. And so a lot of these things that help drive those attitudes and drive those decisions to resign or agree to join because we're attracted are based on a hierarchy of needs, those expectations. Later on, after Abraham Maslow, there was a gentleman named Frederick Herzberg, and you might be familiar with Frederick Herzberg. He identified that there are really two, factors that really create what it is that we do and why we do it, especially within a social activity such as work. And we do that either for what he referred to as hygiene factors or pure motivational factors. Hygiene factors are things like money and compensation. They are, a safe work environment to participate in, good materials around, again, not just safe materials, but good materials, things that we recognize that they create a good working condition. Now, the interesting thing about these hygiene factors is that they don't create more satisfaction because they're there. They only create dissatisfaction if they're not at the level that employees and people expect them to be at. And so if our compensation is not at a good expectation for people to have, it only serves as a dissatisfier. People certainly will get happy and they'll be motivated a little bit when they get a raise, but usually that wanes pretty quickly. What they're really looking for is, belonging, this aspect of real motivational factors. These are things like challenging work, recognition in what we're doing, responsibility for what we're doing, attitudes about the products we're working on and why we're delivering. It gets back, to this aspect of not what we're doing, but why we're doing it, and then how we work with one another to get that done. And it also includes professional and personal growth. Individuals want to know that, I certainly want to do a good job, but I also want to know that I'm actually developing, I'm growing, and I'm contributing to something larger than myself. And so those are some things and differentiating factors between hygiene factors and these real motivational factors. It's the difference between money versus establishing meaning, a difference between the position that I hold versus the purpose that I provide, a difference between an identity as to who I am versus the opportunity to grow into who I can be. And these experiences allow us to be satisfied or dissatisfied, and then create a condition to leave and join the Great Resignation, stay, and contribute to the organization, or get attracted to some other organization itself. One way to think about this, some of you are probably very familiar with kind of user-centered design, that design thinking of these days. And to use another example of an organization that we're all very familiar with, I'll use an example of Starbucks. We're all familiar with Starbucks, the coffee company, the tea company, and Starbucks has what they refer to as a customer journey. It's a very famous map, and it's illustrated here on the screen for you. And what Starbucks does is they have identified what actually creates increased satisfaction, what they call an enriched experience, or decreased satisfaction, dissatisfaction, what they refer to as a poached experience. And they've identified that, okay, when we think about our customers anticipate the desire to have a cup of coffee. They're in the office or they're in their car and they want a cup of coffee. They're going to come to Starbucks. We want them to come to Starbucks. When they enter that Starbucks, we want them to have an experience. We want them to feel a certain way. And we can create conditions that create that feeling. When they engage with our customers, when they engage with the environment around them, we want them to feel a specific way. We want them to experience something very specific. And we want it to be high levels of satisfaction, joy, an enriched experience versus something dissatisfying or a poached experience. And then when they leave, we want them to say good things about us. We want them to refer a friend to go to Starbucks and get a cup of coffee. We want them to be, having a good experience, and we can create those conditions. And Holly's going to talk about, how to create care and development and engagement with individuals. But if you're wondering how to think about your employees, if you haven't conducted or sketched out an employee experience, I encourage you to do exactly what Starbucks does here for their customers, because they do the same thing for their employees. And great organizations, and many of you probably are already doing this, that, from the time someone thinks about getting a job, do they think about Deschutes County? If not, what can we do to increase our brand awareness for those individuals? When they start to apply for a job, when they start anticipating that move, what can we do to help increase the level of experience and joy in that process? When they go through the interviewing process, get the job offer, have their first day of work, have their first week, their first month. We all know of experiences where sometimes we've joined teams where we show up on the first day and it's like, was I supposed to meet John, or was it Susie, or where am I supposed to go? And is my desk set up? Do I have my computer? Does my badge, my key card work to get in the door? We know sometimes we've fallen short on those things, or we know people that have had that experience. It creates an immediately negative experience. It's a dissatisfier. And again, what we're trying to do, in the words of Steve Jobs, and I know it resonates with all of us, we want to create conditions where individuals can truly be satisfied in the work that they do, because they truly believe in the work that they're doing is great. And that is the condition and the experience we do with one another. And it's the condition, the experience that our managers and our supervisors and our executives help to create across our entire county. The Starbucks journey map is a good example to mimic if you're thinking about the employee journey map and how you can create enriched experiences for all of those that are currently working, as well as those that you'll attract to your county to do great work. And so, Debbie, I'll hand it back to you if there's any questions, or pass it on to Holly to talk more about how we can actually create this care and development of employees and others.
Great, thanks, Tim. Just to remind people that you're overseeing the HPLA program. I always tell people, if you want to be a change agent, if you want to be an effective leader with a positive mindset, and you want to build a culture of trust, then you want to participate into this program. Tim, as the old adage goes, people leave managers, not companies. And I read that 70% of employees that leave is because of their managers. So if you're talking to managers, let's just say, and I know you have a lot of advice, but what is the number one advice you would give a manager above all else in terms of how to retain their employees?
So I'll provide 2 points of advice in this regard. I think it's important for all managers to know that the most important tool that they have, the most powerful the tool that they have, is the tool of communication. And that's just not the words that they speak, but it's the way in which they show up every day. It's the way they listen with intention. It's the way they engage with one another as they go through their day. In a remote work environment, we have to be more intentional with reaching out to individuals as well. And so communication is the key to success. The other thing that I will say is that when it comes to recognizing great work, there's no greater way to demonstrate that than to show the final outcome and impact that we have on those that we serve every day. And so to bring the final outcomes back to individuals, about the individuals that they helped that day, the individuals that had great service from the work that we do every day, the more we can feed back the final outcomes of our work, because sometimes we're in the middle of the work experience and we're impacting someone on the front line out in our county somewhere. The more that we can gain testimonials from those that we serve and feed those back to the individuals so that we can see the impact on individuals that we have is extremely powerful. And it really helps us to understand and further believe in the great work that we're doing every day to see that impact that we have on people.
Yeah, I totally agree. Communication is really you can't put a price on that. It's so important. Thanks, Sam. So Holly is now, we've talked about the great attraction. Holly is going to talk to us about the great resolution. Holly,
Yes.
you're on.
Thank you, Debbie. Well, Ian and Tim, I couldn't stop nodding my head. I don't know if anybody else on that on the call, Carlos, feels the same way, but thank you for setting the stage so well for all of us as we think about the pain that is so real with the Great Resignation to the Great Attraction. But what I want to talk about is, what do we do now? I know there's probably a lot of you that are saying, I know all of this and I feel this every day in my role, but what are some practical steps that I can take now in order to make sure that I retain and care for and develop my team? So this slide, the next slide that you're going to see, does a good job of illustrating the tension that I know I feel in my job every day. So we're a people development software here at Leader that was created because of the pain that we're experiencing with the Great Resignation. We started the company about 3 years ago, pre-Great Resignation, pre-COVID, because it was already a tension point, and it's only expedited since then with remote working. And we're going to unpack some of the problems that we're seeing in a minute, but it's the getting the job done. It's executing on the long to-do list and all the goals and outcomes that we all have, whether we're a frontline employee or whether we are a leader of a team, and managing that tension with also the care and development of our people. And so this tension is really where it's our responsibility as the leader to figure out, how do we bridge the gap? How do we get the things done without bulldozing over our people, which is often what causes them to reassess if they want to stay in this role or look for opportunities elsewhere. And Debbie, you nailed it. What you're going to see on the next slide is the stat that you mentioned, which is Gallup tells us that 70% of an employee's engagement depends on their relationship with their manager. That's it, 70%. And so for us to look in the mirror and take ownership of the fact that someone's satisfaction in their job, 70% of that depends on how we are leading them. That can be a humbling statistic for us to really look in the mirror and take ownership of that. I really appreciate what Tim just shared about attitudes versus decisions. That really struck me, of when we're thinking about the Great Resignation, that's an attitude problem. Whereas when we're looking at the Great Attraction, those are decisions that we can make as leaders and as workplaces, leading our counties, to really make sure that we're building a culture of attracting the right people so we can build our best team possible. But when we're thinking about the Great Resolution, that's where I would like for us to think about our responsibility as a leader. So what is our responsibility as a leader? So here are 6, as we were doing a lot of research and building out what our software would look like to really help with this problem. Here are the 6 main pain points that we saw. So I would love to hear from you guys in the chat. If you'll throw in the chat, which of these 6 is the loudest for you? Which of these 6 do you experience on your team or in your own leadership on a regular basis? So for me, it's number 1, tyranny of the urgent. This is the one that I feel more than the others in my own role. I want to care for and develop every person on my team, but my long to-do list, I often prioritize projects over people. And then there's also a generational gap, which we've already seen in the chat today. Great questions around how do we attract millennials and Gen Z leaders to our team for the future of our organizations. And then the lack of consistent structure and framework for development. And Ian touched on this in his talk earlier, of sometimes the bureaucracy or the red tape that can come out of well-intentioned process, but it can be, it can cause hurdles or even be a disconnect between different departments in our organization. And then the disconnection from remote workings. A lot of us were structured as a team in a pre-COVID environment where we made decisions in person, and then migrating to hybrid teams or employees who are demanding more flexibility. What do we do with that? And we're seeing people leave if we're not willing to offer some of that flexibility. And then employee burnout, which I think 5 and 6 are often a result from the pain of 1 to 4, but burnout in our roles. This is especially true in public service. And then of course, seeing that turnover, which can often start 1 through 5 all over again. So love seeing your responses in chat. Looks like staff turnover is a big problem for many of us, which is why we're all here today to talk about the Great Resignation. Looks like one, yes, tyranny of the urgent. I'm not alone in that. I'm so glad to hear that. Catherine and Anne and Barrett say number 3, a lack of consistent structure and framework. Yeah, it's easy to say we need to care for and develop our people, but really building a consistent structure throughout the organization, that's the marathon of people development that takes the hard work. So as we were studying these six problems, we asked ourselves the question, well, how can we take steps consistently to overcome these 6 problems? And so these are the 5 foundations that we discovered in healthy teams. And so as we're thinking about the great resolution to commitment of the care and development of every single person on our team, these are the 5 foundations that we saw in healthy teams. So number 1, that every team member experiences a one-on-one meeting with their manager at least biweekly. So I would ask that question to you. How often are you setting aside intentional one-on-one time between yourself and your direct reports on at least a biweekly basis? I like to do this with my team on a weekly basis. I really feel like the organization moves at the speed of trust. And the best way to build trust is in those intentional one-on-one meetings on a regular basis. But if you're doing this on a monthly basis, I'd encourage you to do it twice a month. If you're not doing this at all, start once a month, have that intentional one-on-one meeting. And what you want to do in these one-on-one meetings is you want to spend about 20 to 50%, depending on the employee and where they are in their work, on the care and development of them as a whole person. And then the other half of that meeting, that's where you're going to look at outcomes, projects, goals, because we really believe that performance comes out of feeling cared for and developed as a team member. If we're doing that right, then performance will take care of itself. The second foundation is really identifying people for their unique skills and strengths. And Tim touched on this in his section so well. This is very important, especially as we're thinking about the next generation, especially Generation Z. They desire to be seen and heard. And so it's important for us as the leader to really understand, where is this person's strengths and where can I put them on the team where they can thrive and be doing their best work, really growing and developing in their strengths. The third is receiving frequent feedback from their manager. So we want to see a disruption of the formal annual performance review. You should definitely be doing regular performance reviews. But if you're only providing feedback to your team members in that annual performance review, that's where we start to see the breakdown of culture and healthy teams. You should be giving and receiving regular feedback on a consistent basis. And we like to see this happen in that one-on-one meeting, to take the stigma of discomfort out of feedback and just have it a regular thing of both positive and critical feedback as we're growing and developing our staff. Fourth, clearly documented goals. How many of you, I know I feel this pain, where we set our goals, we spend lots of time doing strategic planning at the beginning of the year, and then we forget them. It's a quarter later and we haven't looked back at our goals, we've forgotten them, they're not front of mind. And so our team members deserve to have clearly documented goals that are the front of mind when we're having those one-on-one meetings, so that we're not setting and forgetting them, because every single person needs to know if they're winning. So we need to know, as the leader, are we winning? And our team members need to know, are we winning? And the best way to do that is through having clearly documented goals. And then lastly, and this is what Tim and his organization are so good at doing, which is making sure that every team member has a personalized learning and development plan. And so this would be a great goal for you in 2022, to make sure that you yourself have a learning and development plan, and that every single person on your team has a learning and development plan. This can feel really scary. It can feel like this big program or process that we need to develop. But I would encourage you to just start where you are. And if that looks like over the next month, sharing one learning goal with every person on your team, whether it's reading a book or sharing a podcast that you discuss, just to start simple and build as you go, but to make sure that every single person on your team has a pathway of where they see themselves going and on your team and can develop in their role. So these are the 5 foundations that we see in healthy teams. And you can do this with your moleskin journal or duct tapes and paper clips. But if we'll go to the next slide, what we really desire to see is that it all is rolled up in this one-on-one meeting, because we believe that the one-on-one meeting is the most powerful leadership development tool that a manager has. And so keeping our goals front of mind, giving and receiving regular feedback, having regular reviews, having regular action items that come out of those goals, and then regular learning assignments is all filtered through that one-on-one, which we want to see you doing on a bi-weekly basis, at least with every person on your team. So with that, this is my challenge to you, is for you to have the great resolution as a leader and as you're leading your county, to resolve to making the care and development of every person on your team the #1 priority in 2022. And I think you'll be surprised as performance and retention is just going to continue to increase from there when you focus first on the care and development of your team. Happy to address any questions that anyone has about these 5 foundations that we've discovered, or practical questions about what that healthy one-on-one meeting looks like. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Debbie.
Thanks, Holly. Boy, you covered a lot. You really did. And those one-on-ones, I can't stress to managers just how important it is, because it does build that trust, and we, and I know people are busy and trying to factor that in their busy schedule, but you get so much from that. You build a trust, you build a relationship, and you build that certain rapport with your staff, which is so important. The other thing you talked about was performance, just the performance review. And it's so important that people understand the difference between performance reviews and performance management. Obviously, performance reviews is something that happens once a year, more planned, but the performance management pretty much is a casual conversation that you have regularly throughout the year. And again, it's part of building that relationship with the employees. I always say, I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Holly?
Oh, I just said that's so true. I was just agreeing.
So one of the things that, I think that we don't take advantage of it is how do we market or advertise our brand to the fullest extent? And I know that we post jobs all the time, and I always say that I don't think we optimize those job advertisements as much as we can. We oftentimes just list the duties, the responsibilities, what are the qualifications, but I do think it's an opportunity to let potential candidates know who you are. What recommendations do you have, Holly, in optimizing that tool and how to use that to attract potential candidates?
Yeah, well, the #1 thing you can do to attract the potential candidates is to equip your own employees who are raving fans to be that ambassador for recruiting their friends that they know. They're going to be your #1 recruiters, are your current employees. And so I would encourage you to prioritize LinkedIn from a marketing perspective, especially with talent acquisition. LinkedIn is your #1 resource, but that starts at the top. And so as a leader, start to develop your own voice when it comes to how you lead your team and how you as a county, what your culture looks like. You can do some really cool customization on your LinkedIn pages, specifically on the employer side, to show pictures of your culture, talk about your staff values. And then you can even gamify it with your employees of saying, hey, let's see who shares the most on LinkedIn this month in order to help us spread the word about these roles that we're hiring for. So I would say equip your current team members who are already raving fans of working there, and then spruce up your LinkedIn to be able to help spread the word to attract the right candidates.
Yeah, one of the things that, again, as I said, I try to utilize the job advertisement as much as possible, just to kind of talk about our brand and who we are. I read some time ago that the millennials or Gen Z, they've pretty much delayed having kids. And so what they do is, for the most part, they're getting pets. If you notice, every block you go on, there's a pet store, pet products or whatever. So they're delaying. So one of the things that we now have is pet insurance. So, and believe it or not, we get a lot of questions about it, and people want to take advantage of it. So I want to throw it out there to just all of you. What are some of the unique things that you're doing to attract and to retain? Like, again, for us, it's pet insurance. What are some of the things that you can think of or you can suggest that that others could consider?
So
Debbie.
Deborah, if I may, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for this presentation and pulling this together. Tim, I feel like each one of you were speaking to me personally. And thank you for sharing. Holly, bringing in the Gallup work. A little bit about me. I'm the director of County of San Diego Purchasing and Contracting, and I am truly blessed to be part of the county here, the quiet little county way down here next to Mexico. And yes, that is Torrey Pines. You probably saw us on TV a few weeks ago. But we have developed a culture for our county, and I put it in the chat for you all. And please, it's been a lot of deep thought that's gone into this, and this is recently refreshed based upon all the things you guys have brought up. Our new workforce, our chief administrative officer and our board of directors have our board of supervisors. I call them a board of directors because half of my career was on the Fortune 25 side. I worked for a small little company called Science Applications International for 20 years. So we were employee owned. So everything that Tim and everyone has said here, I lived, because we are, as public employees, we are employee owners. We're spending our own tax dollars to do something really cool, which is to help our communities. So I share this with you just as something that we've implemented and grown, and maybe you can take some part of it to use it in your enterprise. And I love what Holly said, which is start small, start at one little thing and grow from there. My department, purchasing and contracting, has grown up to be a department of 70 people now. And at first, Holly, when I first came in, everybody had a one-on-one meeting with me, okay? That became very unmanageable because, first of all, a director with 70 appointments on my calendar is unrealistic. So what I've migrated over the years to do, and I've been in this role now 9 years, is my one-on-one meetings are, maybe not recently because we haven't been in the office, but they're water cooler meetings. I make sure that there's 70 people in my department that I touch them. It might just be saying good morning to them or stopping them in the break room and saying, hey, how are things going? So that's my one-on-one meeting with them. And they have full access to my calendar and can come to me anytime. It's interesting to see new employees that come into the organization. They go, oh, you're going to go talk to the director? And it's like, yeah, I'm going to go talk to the director. And I make it a point, every new employee, no one joins my organization without me having a meet and greet with them. So that might talk about changing a culture. If the director is meeting, and again, I'm a small department of 70 people, but if the director meets everyone that's walking in the front door, I'm giving them a sense of belonging. So I'm going to be quiet now. If you want to contact me offline, I'll put my email in there. And thank you for this session. Great topic, timely topic, and all the best to you.
That's awesome, Jack. Yeah. And just to clarify, I will say the intention was not to have a one-on-one with every single person on the team if you're above, that you're direct reports, because you want to cascade that down in the organization. But
yeah, I mean, I think I have 5, the school, we all learned it in school, right? If you have more than 5 direct reports, you got too many, right? 9
exactly.
is too many. So I have 5 and I do meet with them. But even that, it's about quality time and not just a meeting, because I have found that, we have a meeting. Okay, what do we talk about? Well, I'm talking to everybody every day, multiple times a day. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say, if you can't share a pizza with your direct reports, then you have too many. So that's a good way to think about it. And you're exactly right. It's about carving out that intentionality. And that's what I heard you say over and over again, was just the intentionality of how you're leading your team. So keep it up. That's encouraging.
Yeah, we actually, our executive director, Matt Chase, does the same thing. Again, we have like 86 employees. There's no way he can meet with them on a regular basis, one-on-one all the time. But when new employees come on board, we do have what Ian called a meet and greet. And we try to keep it small enough where you can have those kind of intimate conversations, and Matt can learn more about the individuals, and they just don't think of Matt as this genius in a corner office. And they begin to feel comfortable about who Matt is. And as he said, his door is always open. I think after those conversations, it's like, yeah, he does walk the way he talk, so that works out. There was a question in the chat about the millennials, and how do you get millennials to come into to work in public positions, I guess, for public service? Have you had any issues with that, any challenges? And if so, what advice would you give these millennials to come into the public service?
I know that was a question for Ian on that one, Debbie.
Specifically, yes. Yeah.
Okay,
So I had mentioned in the chat that, a variety of things. One of them is to talk about the value of public service, because that does resonate with that group. You see a lot of volunteerism there. You see a lot of community activism there, generationally from that subset of our population. So, one thing I would stress is that value of public service, that public service motivation, working for your community, working for your neighbors, working for your brethren, your fellow citizens. So that is something that does speak to that generation. But it's also then some of the other things that we've touched on throughout this session, which is what do your benefit offerings look like? What's your work-life balance? Are you static, or are you kind of moving? Is there some fluidity to your organization, or do I feel kind of boxed in or entrenched? Professional development is big for these people. So training, not a plug here. Tim didn't know I was saying this, but the people that in my organization that were millennials, if you will, that took part in the Performance Development Academy, rave about it and speak highly of it. So, it's just those offerings that, the employer pays for you to develop professionally because you're a valued part of our organization. Those generations value that. So I think those type of offerings are important.
Yeah, just trying to come up with some different benefits. Obviously you look at the medical, you look at, the leave. We've recently just reviewed our tuition reimbursement, and we've tried to increase it. Fortunately, we had some money left in our budget this year, and I think it went a long ways. I don't know if we can do that every year, but when you look at the millennials and Generation Z, most of them have huge student loans. And so I think, to me, that has been one of the biggest benefit of all, if we can help them with the student loans. I wonder if any of you are, and even the participants that's online, do you offer the program where you buy down the student loan? We haven't done that. I've thought about it, but I'm wondering if anyone has any experience in that, and has that been a huge benefit? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, Debbie, we do have some folks that work for us that are participating in the formal, I'm going to probably butcher the name, but the public sector loan forgiveness program. So that's an allowable, a tenure of time that they are required to work for an entity that is a participating entity. So federal, state, local government, and they have a requisite amount of time that they meet in that service and are able to get the balance, I believe, of those loans forgiven. So I've actually, as Chief Administrative Officer, signed off on some of those things. Besides that, no, as far as any sort of direct county government contribution towards any outstanding loans, no, but obviously as a participating agency, we allow for it because they're serving time here in service to the county. and they can check that box on their federal filings to allow for them to get relief on whatever's outstanding on their loan balance.
Yeah, and I think Jack said formalizing a telecommuting policy is critical. Absolutely, and particularly now with this pandemic. I mean, it's almost a necessity to have a telecommuting policy. One of the questions that came to me earlier was,
hey, Debbie, I
about,
just want to let you know too that Catherine Smith in the chat said that the tiny town of Vienna, Virginia, offered a $2,500 stipend to pay down their student loan for 7 years. That's actually pretty strong too.
per year for up to 7 years.
Up to
Yeah,
7
that is great. Yeah, that is that. I can't tell you. That's one of the major questions, two major questions we get when staff for potential candidates. One is, do you offer student reimbursement? And two, do you have the telecommute policy? And so what is this forgiveness program over 120? Yeah, and we offer the loan forgiveness program. Again, as Ian said, you have to work, I think, for a nonprofit organization. I think it's in it, and you have to pay your tuition payment on time for a certain number of years, and then they would forgive the loan. But I know some organizations are actually contributing in addition to that, what they're doing is, so for instance, if someone has a payment of say $500, the organization is paying $250 of that every month to buy it down. And what that does is it also helps, it encourages them to take the difference or part of that difference and put it towards the retirement plan. And so, and there are several companies who are working with organizations to do that. The telecommuting is very, very important. As I was going to say, someone asked me earlier today about childcare and how are we dealing with that in terms of our telecommute policy? Because before this pandemic, we used to say, if you're going to work from home, you cannot have a small child in the house. And if so, you need to have someone, another adult who's going to be there to take care of the child. Well, we can't really say that anymore, you know, because people don't always have that luxury with school now, you know, virtual learning, and schools shut down for the least little thing now. If there's a white sheet of paper on the ground, they're going to shut down. So what do parents do? So of course, formalizing a telecommute policy is you have it, but we have to show some flexibility there. Have anyone had to change their telecommute policy during this pandemic? And if so, how did you make that change?
Yeah, sorry, I'll jump in, and I can get you a copy of what we did, but the formalization of that, and now we've done it at an enterprise level. Again, it was supported by our board of supervisors and our CAO, and it allows each of the 40 department heads to customize it for our business needs, which is critical. The role I play as the purchasing officer, the purchasing agent, I could do our job effectively, and my staff did it during the pandemic remotely, would never be in the office. Now I view myself as an evolved manager, because I used to be the guy in the office. I want to see your eyes. You know, we need to have team meetings. I used to be that guy. But my staff has proven to me that not only can they be productive and responsible, but they can actually, that flexibility, they actually work longer and harder because of that. Now there's all kinds of HR issues with some of that, you know, work breaks and all that. But that's where I think this leads into the next conversation we should have, is how can we reform our HR policies to support our business rather than our HR inhibiting our business, if you know what I mean. So that flexibility is critical, where, you know, look, if someone has an older adult, their parents at home they're taking care of, or a young child or whatever, as long as they're working their 8 hours a day, okay, I'm good with that and being productive. So yeah,
and that's really a mindset, I believe, for a lot of a lot of managers, a long time ago, managers assumed that if they were teleworking, they weren't really working. And I have to tell you, there are some staff that kind of support that. There have been times where I've had a manager tell me that I call my staff person and they don't answer the phone. So they assume that they're not working. Mm-hmm. Or I call them and they're out shopping or something. And what I try to get them to do is focus on the work, focus on the task. If it's about performance, if they're meeting the expectations of the job, then focus on that. As we say here, particularly our executive director says, it's not where you do the work as long as you're doing the work. And I think that's helped us a lot here. I know some organizations are requiring staff to come back a certain time, a certain number of days throughout the week. But you're right, Ian. I mean, staff have been very productive. I have an employee who lives, it's about a 2.5 hour drive to get to work. And so you think about that, that's 5 hours, almost 5 hours a day, and 25 hours a week, not to multiply that times a month. And during this pandemic, he finally said, listen, for the first time, I can have dinner with my children, So how do you say to that person, now you need to come back to the office, As he says to me, I now have 25 hours of more time that I can be more productive. So it's really challenging.
It's legitimate though. And, part of it is, it's all about setting expectations. Every one of my staff has a cell phone, and that has become their desk phone is, if they are in the office, their desk phone is forwarded to their cell phone. And I ask them to answer that and, not let all of us, we rely too much on voicemail. Right. But what's really cool is when I answer the phone directly, they go, wow, you don't have your calls screened by an executive? No, I don't.
Yeah, so we actually, we had a receptionist, and because of this pandemic, we just didn't, and everything is so automated now, we just didn't see the need. I have one question I'd like to ask everyone, and that is just as we think about moving forward, do you think this is going to go on much longer? And if not, what do you see what needs to happen for this resignation thing to stop? And that's to everyone on the panel.
I'll start, then just simply say, I don't know that it's going to end anytime soon. I don't know that it's going to end at any time in the future. I think we're in the midst of an aspect of workforce change and work life change that will continue to evolve. And Debbie, I was going to, echo something you brought up. You were asking, like, how do we attract new talent, whether that be millennials or others? How do we work with individuals within the organization in order to get our work done and focus on that performance, as you were just most recently talking about? And one thing you had mentioned is, focus on those stay interviews as well as exit interviews for sure. But I think it's through the communication and asking individuals, what can best help you have to thrive? What will best help you in your work as well as in your life? Reducing your 2.5 hour drive time, to and from every day is a huge help to that individual, and it's showing up in the outcomes of the work that individual is performing. I think that the focus on communication and constantly keeping the pulse of your organization's workforce and what they need to accommodate the outcomes and the success and the connection that you have with customers, I think is key. I'm involved in another organization as well that recently was reviewing some employee satisfaction surveys. And again, it's a point of conversation. It's a point of communication, getting feedback from employees. And they weren't happy with their employee satisfaction surveys. And some of you that conduct those type surveys, it can be heart-wrenching to read some of the results. This company actually had less than 25% of their employees were engaged. About 50% were somewhat neutral, and 25% were disengaged. And what they explained disengagement to mean was these individuals had identified 10 or more negative activities every single day to
Wow.
create their dissatisfaction, their disengagement in the work. And the only way in which you resolve that is, one, over time, and it's through every touch point that you can make. Jack was just talking about the touch points that he has, those one-on-ones. Holly was echoing that as well. I think it's in the one-on-ones and the small group activities and the ongoing conversation. What does the workforce need? How do we accommodate what we can accommodate, and talk about why we can't accommodate what we can accommodate? Once the pandemic ends or the Great Resignation ends, there's likely going to be something else,
Yeah.
and something else after that. So there's this ongoing aspect of change, which requires ongoing aspects of communication and engagement.
Yeah, you're so right, Tim. And we are at the end of our time. And so out of respect for everyone's time, we're going to bring this to a close. First, I want to thank everyone for joining us as we navigate these challenging times. We had a record number of employees quitting this year. What we need to do is take the time to learn why, and we need to act thoughtfully. We need to understand what they are running from and what they might gravitate to, so we can have an edge in attracting and retaining talent. Well, we hope your time was spent well today, because I'm sure you could have spent it doing something else. And we're hoping that you join us for our next event, which is the emotional impact COVID is having on the workforce. So join us the next time to find out. Be on the lookout, as we will be sending information, dates and times. In the meantime, we continue to work on our portal, our Workforce Network portal for professionals like you, so that you may have access to resources in terms of best practices. We want to be able to have job descriptions and a lot of information that you would just use this resource for. We believe the best place to get information is from people who do the same thing that we all do. So again, be on the lookout and stay tuned, and we look forward to meeting with you the next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone. Thank you all so
Debbie.
much. It was a great, great webinar.
Yes.